Okay, so I am ready to go ahead and start painting on my impossible shape, and I'm going to work the background first. I'm going to begin by getting my brush wet and then pulling that water back out just to kind of help soften it up. And you'll see I have like all of these different variations of red violet on my plate. I think I mentioned in the last video I was not loving my red violet, so I remixed it again. I used a little bit of a true purple that I had here, and I ended up with this shade of red violet, which I do really like. So I'm going to work mainly out of this puddle, but I will probably pull little bits of all of them in. That's why you see all of these different things happening on my plate. But primarily I am focused on my red violet and my yellow green. My yellow green I'm going to save for my impossible shape, and I'm only going to work the background first. Now, you get to play with the tints and the tones however you would like in the background, but your goal here is that you're doing wet on wet technique, which I'll show you in just a second. If you have a wet on wet like dark area here, that should carry through into this area. Pretend that the whole impossible shape is not on the page. We want it to look like it's floating above the page. So whatever is happening in the background, if it's happening here, it would most likely be happening here. If it's happening here, it's most likely going to be happening here. So keep that in mind as you're working on this. I'm going to start by just putting a little bit of brush in my paint. Not a lot, you can see just about that much. And I want you to work right up to the edge of your impossible shape, like totally cover the pencil line. But I'm trying to be precise and neat about it, so that when I come back to paint my impossible shape, it's pencil lines are removed, but I can really get a crisp edge. Okay, and I'm going to just start kind of working this like I'm icing a cake. So my brush is just lightly floating over the top of this paper. I'm just going to work one little section at a time. I do my little bit of outlining, get that precision work taken care of, and then I'm free to kind of come in here and start smoothing things out. Right now I'm working with all one color. Okay, and it's definitely going to take 2 coats of paint to get it nice and smooth. Remove my this little ridge of built up paint along the edge of my shape here. Just try to pull that out and get it nice and smooth. Don't stress if you get a little mark that goes into your shape a little bit more than what you would like. It's okay. Try not to overwork it, but don't be too fussy with it either. Okay, now I'm going to mix a little bit of a darker shade. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of that complement, and over here kind of out to the edge of my paint, I'm going to mix some of that in. Do a little bit of a darker hue. And then I'll start kind of pulling some of that in. I'm going to put just a touch of blue in that as well to kind of, it's just going really brown, really yellow, and that blue will kind of help neutralize that and just make it a really nice and deep color. Again, this is why we tested all of this on your sketchbook so that you could figure out how this all interacts together, all of those colors. There's no hard and fast rules. You're going to have to make little tweaks until you get it how you like it. Now, if you overwork the color, it's going to start lifting it off of the page. You can kind of see a little bit right in here. See this little halo mark? It's like the paint's not sticking there. That's because it's dry here, but it's thicker there and it's staying really wet. It's a lot like if you've ever made pudding on the stove. A lot of times as you're cooking it, or if you're letting it cool, it'll get that really, like we call it the skim layer on top, where it gets kind of solidified and hard. But if you cut through that, it's all puddingy underneath. That's how your paint is as well. So the top is dry, but what's underneath is still wet. And that's what's causing that paint to lift back off and not attach. I can always come back later and do some touch up. I'm going to try and go for darker on my edges, kind of a graded effect, and then lighter as it comes into the middle as well. what I'm gonna go for. But you can do yours however you want. If you want to go dark light, you can do that. It's just totally up to you. I don't want any hard edges, so you'll see I'm coming back where I've changed colors here. I'm kind of working it, cross-hatching. If you'll think back to your drawing classes that you've done leading up to this, you know cross-hatching means you go both ways. That's kind of my approach here. And just kind of feather and build. Wet on wet until that's totally nice and shaded in, okay? I will come back and do a second coat right in here because it's still pulling and lifting just a little bit. Give it a little turn and keep going. You can come back after you've gotten the paint out of your brush and do just almost like a dry brush effect. It will kind of help blend. I tapped the paint out of my brush right here on the side because I know there's more color going there anyway, but I could also dry it off on my paper towel as well if I wanted. Okay, now I'm going to come back in and I'm going to start adding a tint to my inside. So I'm going to pick up with that lighter color because that's what's on this other edge all the way around. Pull that in a little bit. Again, you have creative freedom here. Do what is a good fit for you, however you want to play with the darks and the lights. Just make sure that it makes sense. And I'm going to take a little bit of white up and I'm going to start pulling that white into the middle. And I'm just gonna mix that right in on my canvas. Because I'm doing wet and wet, I can add little bits of white in. And this is a very loose painting. It's not like I'm adding a highlight or anything like that. So I can just kind of mix it directly on my canvas. You'll notice that the tail of my paintbrush is pointing back towards me. Yours should be doing the same. Okay, I accomplished this in one coat. However, it's really brush strokey, which maybe is a good thing, and I like that. But I'm gonna plan on going back in and adding a second coat just to help kind of take a little bit of that white paper feel. And really, like we talked about in class, this paint really does take 2 to 3 coats to really get a nice, thick, smooth application. Once you go ahead and do a second coat, once the first coat is dry, just so that you can really begin to see the difference that 2 coats makes instead of 1. It's going to take a lot of those lines and brush strokes away. Intentionally bringing a little bit of it up in here so we get a little bit of a speckledy effect of the graded value thing going on. That second coat is going to make a big difference. Doing a lot of dry brush here, you'll find second coat and third coat go much faster, just like when you're painting a room with house paint, much quicker than first coat. Precision does matter, so please take your time working around your edges of your impossible shape. Make sure that you're really not rushing as you get in close. And we'll just speed this up and finish this off. All right, so that's the second coat of paint. Hopefully you can tell that has made a huge difference. Make sure everything looks smooth. If you find your canvas or your illustration board is curling at all, it is okay to let that fully dry and then come back later and press it under a book or two, and that should straighten it back out really quickly. But that's it for our background on our possible shape.